Is inequality determined at birth or in the very early years of life? Joining me today to discuss this is Professor James Heckman of the University of Chicago, laureate of the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economics, and an expert on the economics of skill. Professor Heckman, thanks for joining me. We hear a lot about inequality, but the causes we hear have to do with globalization, technology, rigged political systems. Are we missing something?
Well, all of those factors may be in play. But an important component of inequality is skill. And the return to skill has been changing over life over the last 30, 40 years. And we also know that the determinants of skill are much better understood than they might have been 40, 50 years ago. So there has been, I think, a neglect of skills, educational policy, and skill policy more generally.
So does that mean that the provision of skill and skills training is a big factor in determining inequality in adult life outcomes?
Well, I think the provision, yes, but also the skill level is something that can be shaped by social policy. And it's something that we need to understand better. And we've had recently a much better understanding of the sources, the origins of skill, and how they can be best expressed in life.
Let's talk about that understanding, which you have contributed greatly to. There is a chart that you have done a lot to make well known that comes from your research. We see it here.
Yes.
Can you tell us what this says?
Well, this is a thought experiment that actually has some counterpart in reality. What it's really saying is the obvious. If you look at what economists call the rate of return, which is the payment per unit value per annum, say, per period, whatever the period is, of how much a pound invested in a child will pay off annually ever thereafter.
In terms of higher incomes?
Higher incomes, in terms of a larger set of social benefits, which we might imagine monetizing, including health, including reduction in crime, including aspects of social participation. But what this is showing is a very simple idea, that the early years are the formative years. They lay the skill base for everything that happens. And so an investment in the early years that makes the child better able to benefit from all the opportunities that open up in the later years has a very, very high economic return. And much of that return comes from the fact that it's enabling, it's opening up options all the way downstream. So if a child is neglected early on in life, that child misses many options. Only, say, in adult life, when the child starts getting a chance, or at some other stage in the life cycle, will the child actually be able to come back and maybe try to make up for this? This graph is saying that if we think about what the economic rate of return, just the economic rate of return, it's going to be highest at those earliest, most malleable years, partly because the brain and the whole persona of the child, very flexible in that period. And secondly,
this is where you can make the most difference.
You can make the most difference. And what you can do is then essentially build a skill base for all future investments to come.
Now, this is a conceptual graph. It doesn't have numbers, but could you give us a rough sense of what these rates of return are?
Well, we know that for the early programs, now combining prenatal and 0-3, the studies have shown annual rates of return of somewhere between 7 and 13% per annum. 13% is a recent estimate that we've come up with, going back to the prenatal years and looking at benefits that include health, reduction of crime, and so forth.
So this sounds like we're starting to get understanding about how to help the most disadvantaged people if we address it very early in life at actually not very much cost at all.
No, you're getting a very, very high economic return. And as we've come to understand better the way that skills are formed, we also have come to understand that the structure of these investment programs can be actually simplified and made cheaper. Initially, we didn't know what we were doing, and there's a lot of kind of exploration of ideas. But once we start distilling the ingredients of what these successful programs do, stimulating the parent, operating with the child, providing a kind of supplement to parenting for disadvantaged children, that can have a huge economic and social benefit.
Professor Heckman, thank you very much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.